Have you ever sat in a cold, sterile doctor's office, completely terrified of needles, watching a nurse pull massive vials of blood out of your arm and wondering why medical technology still feels so incredibly primitive? What if I told you that just a few years ago, a young, charismatic Silicon Valley billionaire wearing a black turtleneck completely convinced the entire world that she had mathematically solved this exact problem? She promised a total medical revolution, claiming she had invented a tiny magical desktop machine called the Edison that could run hundreds of complex laboratory tests. From just one single tiny pinprick of blood, she sold this beautiful dream to massive venture capitalists, former United States presidents, and thousands of everyday working class people, turning her startup into a massive $9 billion global empire. But what if I told you that absolutely none of it was real, and the entire multi-billion-dollar medical miracle was actually held together by fake computer screens, secret commercial machines, and a terrifying web of absolute sociopathic deception? Welcome back to Money's Hidden Past, where we always look past the complicated Silicon Valley jargon and figure out how the global economy really actually works in our everyday lives. Today, we are looking very closely at the absolute darkest and most dangerous financial fraud of the modern technology era, the terrifying rise and spectacular collapse of Theranos and its founder Elizabeth Holmes. And we are going to gently break down exactly how a complete medical illusion managed to fool the smartest investors on the planet while delivering dangerously fake health data to thousands of real human beings. We will explore 3 highly controversial and deeply hidden facts about the company, including fake laboratory tours, a board of military generals, and the absolute heartbreaking tragedy of a brilliant scientist who tried to tell the truth. But before we jump into the fascinating history and explore this wild digital world together, please do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a friendly comment down below and let me know. If you remember seeing Elizabeth Holmes on the cover of all those famous business magazines, your support truly means the world to me. And it helps this video reach more everyday hardworking people who might find this honest historical conversation helpful and eye-opening to completely understand how Elizabeth Holmes managed to pull off a massive $700 million heist. You first have to deeply understand the dangerous culture of Silicon Valley. In the modern technology industry, there is a very famous mantra that says, "Fake it until you make it." If you are building a new smartphone application for delivering food or a new website for sharing photos, it is completely acceptable to launch a slightly broken product and just fix the computer bugs later. But Elizabeth Holmes took that exact same software startup mentality and recklessly applied it directly to human biology and actual human health. She promised the world a small, sleek black box called the Edison machine that was supposedly capable of running hundreds of highly complex medical tests using only a tiny microscopic drop of blood from a simple finger stick. It sounded like absolute science fiction because, according to the basic fundamental laws of chemistry and physics, it actually was science fiction. The underlying technology fundamentally completely failed to work. When you try to run hundreds of complex tests on one tiny drop of blood, the biological sample is simply too small, and the blood cells often physically burst during the collection process, completely destroying the data. But instead of admitting defeat to her massive, wealthy investors, Elizabeth Holmes and her company leadership chose to construct a massive, unyielding corporate lie to keep the multi-billion-dollar illusion alive. Theranos secretly took those tiny drops of human blood and artificially diluted them with chemical solutions to make the samples physically larger. They then secretly ran those diluted blood samples through standard, massive, commercially available blood testing machines, secretly purchased from rival companies like Siemens. This absolute massive deception did not just defraud wealthy Silicon Valley investors out of their fiat capital, it delivered completely wildly inaccurate and sometimes dangerously fake health data to thousands of everyday working class patients who were making massive life or death medical decisions based on those completely fabricated results. But how exactly did she manage to hide this massive operational fraud from the powerful politicians, wealthy investors, and nosy journalists who constantly visited her corporate headquarters? This brings us to the first deeply hidden and completely controversial fact about Theranos, the creation of a literal fake laboratory decoy for very important people. As the hype surrounding the company reached its absolute peak, high-profile politicians and massive celebrities constantly wanted a physical tour of the futuristic Theranos laboratory. In July of 2015, the sitting Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden, arrived at the Theranos headquarters for a highly publicized personal tour of the facility. Elizabeth Holmes knew she absolutely could not walk the Vice President of the United States into the real working laboratory because he would immediately clearly see the massive standard Siemens machines secretly processing all the blood, so they mathematically engineered an absolute theatrical stage set. According to the brave whistleblowers and incredible journalists who finally exposed the fraud, the company forced their microbiology team to completely vacate a specific room inside the building. They freshly repainted the walls and lined the room with rows and rows of sleek, modern Theranos mini lab machines, completely stacking them on beautiful metal shelves to look like a cutting-edge automated laboratory. When Vice President Joe Biden and other massive VIPs took the tour, they would get their fingers pricked and proudly watch their tiny blood sample go directly into the futuristic Edison machine. But what the Vice President absolutely did not know was that the machine was completely programmed to simply display a fake, glowing processing screen. The Edison machine was doing absolutely nothing at all, as soon as the very important person completely left the room and walked down the hallway. An exhausted engineer would secretly frantically extract the physical blood sample from the fake machine and literally physically run it down the hallway to the real hidden laboratory to run it on a traditional commercial machine to get the actual medical result. Vice President Joe Biden stood in front of the press and publicly called the technology incredibly inspiring, completely unaware that he had just been given a guided tour of a literal theatrical movie set. But even with fake laboratories and diluted blood, how did she manage to mathematically prevent actual real medical doctors and brilliant scientists from aggressively questioning her completely impossible technology? This leads us directly to the second massive controversial fact: how Elizabeth Holmes strategically built a massive corporate board of intimidating military warhawks instead of actual medical professionals. If you are building a massive revolutionary healthcare technology company, your corporate board of directors should logically be filled with brilliant medical doctors, experienced biochemists, and professors of human biology. But Elizabeth Holmes completely deeply understood that real doctors would ask real, highly uncomfortable scientific questions that she could not mathematically answer. So to completely deeply insulate herself from any form of legitimate scientific scrutiny, she actively, deliberately stacked her board of directors with some of the most incredibly powerful, intimidating political and military heavyweights in modern American history. She successfully recruited former United States Secretaries of State, like Henry Kissinger and George Shultz. She brought on powerful military figures like the future Secretary of Defense, Star General James Mad Dog Mattis. She filled the boardroom with massive global politicians, former senators, and highly connected billionaire corporate titans who knew absolutely nothing about the highly complex reality of human blood chemistry. This incredibly calculated corporate maneuver created a massive, unyielding psychological halo effect. When inquisitive journalists or skeptical investors started to quietly question if the medical technology actually physically worked, they would look at the massive board of directors and immediately back down. People naturally assumed that a powerful four-star general or a massive global diplomat like Henry Kissinger would absolutely never risk their massive historical reputations on a fake company. The board of directors acted as an absolute massive physical shield of pure psychological intimidation, completely protecting the medical fraud from the outside world, while giving the massive company an absolute false, completely unearned air of absolute global legitimacy. But while the massive politicians were giving interviews and the wealthy Silicon Valley investors were dreaming of billions of dollars, the actual scientists working silently inside the company were completely drowning in absolute psychological misery. And this brings us to the third and absolute most heartbreaking hidden fact about the massive Theranos Deception, the incredibly tragic and deeply painful fate of the chief scientist, Ian Gibbons. Ian Gibbons was an absolutely brilliant, highly respected British biochemist with degrees from Cambridge University, and over 30 years of deep experience in diagnostic testing. He was one of the very first people hired by Elizabeth Holmes back in 2005 to actually physically build the technology she was loudly promising to the world. But as the years dragged on and the intense corporate pressure mounted, Ian Gibbons realized a terrifying fundamental truth. The technology simply was not working. The results were wildly inaccurate, and he tried over and over again to desperately warn Elizabeth Holmes and the company leadership that the medical devices were completely failing and not ready for the public, but instead of listening to her absolute most brilliant scientist, Elizabeth Holmes, completely marginalized him, aggressively ignored his deep scientific warnings, and heavily isolated him from the rest of the company. Ian was trapped in an absolute living hell, completely deeply ashamed to be scientifically associated with a medical product that he mathematically knew was providing dangerous fake data to real human patients. The breaking point finally arrived in the year 2013, when Theranos got deeply involved in a massive, highly aggressive patent lawsuit. The massive corporate lawyers at Theranos legally summoned Ian Gibbons to give a sworn deposition in the case. This put this brilliant, honest scientist in an absolute, completely impossible, and deeply terrifying human position. If he sat down under oath and told the absolute honest medical truth about the broken technology, he would completely destroy the entire massive multi-billion-dollar company and immediately face the absolute brutal crushing wrath of the terrifying Theranos legal team. But if he lied under oath to protect Elizabeth Holmes, he would completely destroy his own deeply held personal integrity and commit a massive federal crime. The crushing psychological pressure, the deep, profound scientific humiliation, and the terrifying legal threats became absolutely completely insurmountable for this gentle, brilliant man. On the evening of May 16th, 2013, just one single night before he was legally scheduled to sit down for that terrifying legal deposition, Ian Gibbons tragically took a massive overdose of medication. He passed away in the hospital a week later, completely breaking the heart of his loving wife and ending the life of a truly brilliant human being who simply wanted to do good medical science. But the absolute darkest and most chilling part of this entire tragedy is exactly how the massive multi-billion-dollar company actually reacted to his death, when Ian's completely devastated wife tearfully called the Theranos corporate office to inform them that their chief scientist had tragically passed away. Elizabeth Holmes absolutely never even bothered to return her phone call. She showed absolutely zero human remorse and zero empathy for the man who had dedicated years of his life trying to save her company from itself. Instead of offering condolences, the grieving widow immediately received a cold, ruthless email from a powerful Theranos corporate lawyer, strictly demanding that she immediately return Ian's confidential company laptop and all of his physical corporate files. The massive multi-billion-dollar startup absolutely did not care that a beautiful human life had just been tragically lost. They only actively cared about aggressively mathematically protecting the massive corporate lie. The massive spectacular collapse of Theranos is not just a simple story about a failed Silicon Valley technology startup losing money. It is an incredibly profound and deeply terrifying warning about what happens when you combine the absolute ruthless growth at all costs mentality of the digital internet with the fragile physical reality of human biology. When a social media website fails, people simply lose a little bit of online entertainment. But when a massive healthcare company lies about medical data, real everyday working class people face terrifying false cancer diagnoses, unnecessary panic, and tragic human consequences. Elizabeth Holmes successfully manipulated the absolute deepest desires of the global financial elite, who desperately wanted to believe in a magical female Steve Jobs, who could save the world with a single drop of blood. But the absolute true foundational cost of that beautiful multi-billion-dollar illusion was quietly paid for by the exhausted offshore engineers hiding the real machines, the terrified ordinary patients receiving fake medical results, and the brilliant scientists who simply could not live with the unbearable weight of the lie. If you found this incredibly friendly and completely honest look at the absolute epic hidden economics of the Theranos Deception truly helpful, and if it gently gave you a much better deep understanding of how the absolute biggest medical fraud in modern history was actually mathematically pulled off behind closed doors, please do me a massive physical favor and hit that like button. Right, this absolute second, it really truly helps this independent channel grow and lets the completely automated algorithm politely know that these honest, thoughtful historical conversations really deeply matter to hardworking everyday people, exactly like you. Share this video with a close friend who loves true crime, or maybe someone who is just genuinely deeply curious about how the modern digital economy actually mathematically operates when things go terribly wrong. We are going to absolutely keep looking deeply into the fascinating, highly hidden stories behind global money, modern technology, and how they constantly, secretly affect our everyday daily lives without us even noticing, and I absolutely, truly cannot wait to excitedly share the next interesting historical chapter with you. Until next time, remember to always deeply take care of yourselves, and definitely kindly take care of each other. Stay incredibly curious, ask really good tough questions, and always firmly remember that true global financial knowledge is almost never exactly what the massive flashy tech CEOs desperately want you to blindly believe. Thank you so much for graciously spending your highly valuable time with me today, and I will absolutely beautifully see you in the next video.